You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I am Kirk Mona, and I am joined today by Rachel Ginza and Victoria Thompson. We are all professional naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Kirk.
Hi.
My topic, I'm going to be up front. It's not too strange. I just got some fun stories I want to tell you guys about.
We're going to kick you off this podcast.
How dare you?
Please don't. I need to make up for last...
If we did that,
one from last week's. Let's say it does not involve corpses at all.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Well, that's good.
Great.
I was going to say if we kicked you off the podcast, there wouldn't be a podcast because you do all the producing
Editing.
of it. So that'd be a problem.
It would you could still get together and talk, just no one would hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something magical, and I hope you'll agree. There's something magical about islands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in a biological sense, they are traps where we see a lot of evolution taking place and a lot of diversification. So we tend to talk about species from islands a lot on this show because they tend to be pretty noteworthy and different. And I will note that Australia is essentially a huge island. So that's kind of accounts for some of the weirdness going on there. And I've been trying to think for a while about why an island seems like such a magical place in our imagination. I mean, apart from the biological wonders that, geeks like us, geek out over.
Oh, they're so good.
Whether it's an island in the middle of a lake or an island in the ocean, islands hold sort of a special place in our minds. And as I was thinking about this, I was picturing you'll probably know because you're nerds, the island in the lake in the Harry Potter films.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. Absolutely.
It's in tons of shots. I don't think they ever actually even set foot on the island.
No, they didn't.
Movies, but it's always there. It's just this really cool thing to see in the background, right? And it seems magical. It makes the location feel more magical sort of setting just because it's there. And that's sort of the power that islands have over us. And in the real world, many people dream of going on vacation to a tropical island somewhere. So we have these fantasies or ideas about what islands are and what they're like. And so I try to think about really, what is it about an island that has this appeal or this draw for us? And I think one of the draws, there's likely many, is that an island can be understood, right? So we live on a planet that is enormous. It's huge. It's hard to really comprehend the size of our planet, and it can be overwhelming sometimes. But an island, an island is smaller. You could, in theory, explore the whole thing. Even if you don't, you know that you could.
Yeah.
And the whole scope of an island can be understood. It can all be seen. It can all be comprehended. An island reduces the world to an understandable chunk. And I think that holds a certain grounding effect and a certain meaning for humans. I think there's an appeal in our brain to that idea. And now if that island happens to be a tropical one that is nice and sunny, a beautiful place that you can enjoy spending your time, all the better, right? And realize not islands are all beautiful, tropical, wonderful places, but boy, especially in the winter, going somewhere like that sounds really nice.
Yes.
Although islands that are inaccessible and hard to find are also appealing to us. The movie example is the skull-shaped island where the evil genius hangs out with his skull volcano or whatever. It's we use these as tropes. That's where his
evil fortress is. Yes.
Exactly. And it may be very hard to get to or even hidden, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of these sort of hidden islands is very appealing. I actually have a really cool book about islands that someone gave me years ago. It's by Malachi Talik. It's called The Undiscovered Islands, an archipelago of myths and mysteries, phantoms and fakes. And the book details the stories of 24 different islands around the world that at one time were thought to be real and people have sought out and tried to reach. But it turns out in the end, they're all myths. None of them actually exist. So it's kind of a fun read. people want these islands. They want these places to exist so bad that the legend of them continues on even after, we went to all these places and mapped the world and know for sure that they don't exist. They're myths.
Right.
So if you're looking for some fun stories about islands you can never visit, you can check out that book, The Undiscovered Islands. But I want to talk about the opposite of that. I want to talk about islands that we didn't know existed that then were discovered. So basically, I want to talk about new islands.
Okay.
Now, certainly at some point in the Earth's history, humans discovered like all the places we live. And some of those islands places are islands. So it's not too surprising that, new islands are discovered. But most of that was very long ago. Although actually, a lot of the Polynesian islands were more recently populated. Actually, one of the most recently populated spots on Earth. Some of the Polynesian islands were populated less than 1,000 years ago, which is like nothing in the scope of time in human history. But I want to focus on even more recent than that. I want to go for like sort of the modern era here. Like, have we discovered any islands lately? And the answer is yes, we have. And there's two, there's more than two, but there's two I want to talk to you about. So first up, we have literally brand new islands. And where you have volcanoes underwater, you can get new islands when they rise up. Actually, in the months leading up to the recent Tongan volcanic eruption that made the news, a new island formed due to volcanic activity. It was actually two islands that became connected by a new land bridge. So the new island was like two land masses plus a connection that made a whole new island.
Cool.
It was subsequently utterly destroyed in the record-setting blast. So it didn't last too long. The blast that echoed around the world and was even seen from space. So probably not that nice of a place to visit, but it'd be a pretty interesting place to visit. Similarly, I talked on the show about Krakatoa. And Krakatoa has been active since the big eruption there, and it is creating a new island. And this new island, which is basically called Son of Krakatoa, emerged from the water starting in the 1930s and is still growing to this time. And there's plants and things on it, and it's like a cool island.
That's fun.
And you may be picking up on a lot of these islands, though, are not expected to survive necessarily because they're in highly volcanically active areas. They either like subside into the ocean, or they get blown apart, and they get reformed all the time. So there's lots of examples of this.
Which
the most sort of interesting.
I feel like we don't generally think of islands as being like blown apart or like sinking back in or anything like that. Like nowadays, I feel like the islands we have are the islands that have always been there, which I know is not true.
Right, but it's changing all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't.
I mean, the ones we know of are
that.
the ones that didn't disappear. And the ones that didn't disappear are the ones that are there. And actually, when I was in Hawaii, I was on Maui, and I was looking at the history of the eruptions and how they changed the shape of the island and like just removed whole parts of the island or added onto the island or joined different islands together.
Yeah.
Like really, really fascinating how it changes. We just think of like this one period in time as, like you said, it's kind of how it is. But of course, that's not at all how it is. So one that I came upon when I was looking into this more is an interesting new island called Surtsey. And this one kind of made the news. It's an island of volcanic origin that started to erupt and emerge from the ocean off the coast of Iceland all the way back in the 1960s.
I've heard about
this. So this was a pretty big deal. It originally, it was just erupting, and it originally covered about a square mile is how big this island was. It has since then eroded some. It's about half as big as it was, but it's still 500 feet tall. And apparently geologists actually think that this one is here to stay. Like it's not just going to wash away. So that's
exciting.
I think that's a pretty cool one. Yeah, and it's now like it's got a name, it's sticking around, and it's not expected to just like, it's not like a pile of pumice that's just going to wash away or something.
Right.
So, that one, Surtsey, and the other ones are new islands. But what about islands that are just new to us?
That's what I was wondering.
Undiscovered islands. Yeah. So, like islands that have been around for millions of years, but just no one ever realized it was there or visited it. Turns out I found one fun example. And the thing is, we've done a pretty good job of charting the Earth, right? We know what's there and what isn't there. We're not just going to usually randomly find an island we didn't know about. Except
how
that's
wild would that be?
exactly what happened.
What?
That's exactly what happened when NASA launched the Landsat satellite back in 1972. That was Landsat 1. There's been many more since then.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1972, they launched the Landsat satellite, and this is like an Earth observation satellite. So it's imaging the whole world, or at least it got through about 75% of the world before it failed in 1978. But Canadians who were looking at these Landsat photos realized there was an island pictured that they had never seen before that was in Canada. It's actually up off the northeast coast of Canada in Labrador. And if you ever looked at the map, there's like hundreds of islands. So you think, okay, well, not to be surprised if someone we sort of missed
an
one.
island.
But it's but it's not quite that. It's that this one lone island is a little bit further out to sea than all the rest, and for that reason, it just got totally overlooked because nobody ever went out there. You can't really see it from other islands, and you would really have no reason to be on these other islands anyways, because they're so remote. But Canadians were interested in this because there's a rule about like what qualifies as the territorial waters of a country. Yeah. And this island was miles, further away than any other island. So if they can prove this island actually existed and it wasn't just a floating iceberg or something like that, it could actually like show that Canada's territorial waters claim extended further out from the shore than expected. In this case, it would mean that the edge of Canadian waters was 12 miles further out than they had previously thought. So that'd be pretty cool. Now that is not a huge number. 12 miles is not really all that far. If verified, speaking. It's kind of fun. But if verified, the new island was going to add about 28 square miles of territory to Canadian waters. So it's not really that much. The island itself was not very huge. They could see that it was, you can see how it would be overlooked. It was only about 82 feet by 148 feet. So pretty small. And in like icy seas, you can see why it was missed. But naturally, being humans and loving to explore, someone had to go there, right? And that somebody was Dr. Frank Hall. It was literally his job, since the land had to be verified to be real, and he was the guy who did that. So not content to take a ship, though, through these icy waters, they decided the easiest way to get there would be by helicopter. And Dr. Hall was going to be lowered down onto the island by helicopter to be the first human to ever set foot there. And sure enough, they went there, and there was an island where the satellite showed it would be, which is pretty cool. It was covered completely in snow, so it was all white in an icy sea, and they hooked him up into this big harness to lower him down to like the highest part of the island, which isn't really high, basically a big hill. And as he got very close to the surface, he was very close to the surface when he suddenly realized, to his horror, that not only was he about to be the first ever human to set foot on this island, he would also very shortly be the first human being to ever die on this island.
Oh my God.
What?
Because completely camouflage, standing in the exact spot he was being lowered down to, was a giant white polar bear.
Oh no.
Which he did not realize that he was like almost on the ground.
Abort!
Oh no.
Abort!
So he starts like yanking on the cable and like, abort, pull me up. And
That's
so they quickly they reel him back up. He sadly did not get to set foot on the island, but they did verify that it was a real place. He actually wanted to name it Polar Island.
Because of the polar bear? Yeah.
Correct. But it became known as Landsat Island. It was the first new island discovered by Landsat, which is pretty cool.
The only island named after a satellite.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. And Landsat has discovered some other islands too, but I thought that was just really cool that there's an island called Landsat Island up in Canada.
I love
it.
The
next time you are on an island, realize that you don't need to be the first person there, but just watch out for bears anyways.
You've given me some topic ideas here. Kirk.
Oh, good. My sources this week were NASA and Wikipedia. All right. Well, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, it'll be Rachel's turn.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point right here, I know everyone's expecting our sort of normal little plea for, please go to Patreon and join the Society of Strange. I mean, please do that.
Yeah, we love that.
I'm hoping we can do something a little bit different this month. I'm hoping you can all share us with a friend. Become a patron. That's awesome. It's not for everybody, but a way you can support us other than, financially is tell people about the show. The more friends you share us with, the more people find out about it. And we love to have, be hearing from more listeners and be getting out our signal out there. We love to be doing this for an ever growing audience. And I can tell some of you have been doing that and I appreciate it, but I'm hoping that some of you can share our podcast out there, share it on social media, share it with a friend over a cup of coffee, and just take this month to share us with a friend. How's that sound?
That would really help us out.
That would super help us out. I know I talk about the podcast like all the time, and
I don't shut up about it. Yeah, it's great.
It's amazing.
But I only know so many people,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you enjoy this show and you find yourself I gotta tell someone about this weird thing I heard on the show, please do share with your friends what you heard, but also say, hey, here's where I heard it. You might enjoy this show. If they enjoy the stories you're telling from the show, give away your secret source. Bring them into the society, bring them in on the fun. And the more we grow, the more we can do. And we just love having you all here.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back to the show. Rachel, I think it's going to be your turn.
So as both of you know, I just recently went through, and I say recently, I went through it today, a water safety training as part of my work, as part of being summer camp. And a lot of what we talked about was how to go and rescue a drowning person out on the water, as well as what to do when you reach that person and things like that, all about being safe for yourself as well as that particular person. But a lot of the skills that we were learning were how to flip the person onto their back, as well as get them floating on top or near the surface of the water. And and this actually kind of came up while we were talking, or while we were discussing different scenarios and everything. But it got me thinking about how, because a couple of the staff are actually international staff. So they came from, they had learned something different over in the UK where they're from. And it was a way for them to be saved or whatever if they're out in the middle of the sea. But the sea, of course, has salt in it. So it's a lot easier to float.
Very different. Yeah.
It's a little bit different. Whereas here in Minnesota, there's a lot more, it's all fresh water. I was going to say a lot more. It's
a lot more fresh water, yes.
It's all fresh water.
I ran into that when I was teaching. I used to teach a lot of Girl Scout canoe, the small craft badge specifically, which doesn't exist anymore. But they wanted all these kids to do this rescue float where when your boat capsizes, you are supposed to tuck your knees up to your chest and kind of bear hug your legs and learn how to float there until you can get rescued.
You just turn around so your face is in the water.
Well, I was like, hey, look, you guys, if you really want to learn this, I'll teach it to you. We, in any lake in Minnesota you're canoeing in, you're probably not going to be more than 30 feet from the shore. Don't float here for 4 hours waiting for someone to rescue you. You got a life jacket on, go swim to shore and walk out of the lake. So it's
more or less
the book was clearly written by people who, were learning how to use small craft in the ocean. Totally different thing.
Very different. But it got me to thinking about salt contents in certain lakes and oceans and just what all that kind of means. And it brought me to what is the lowest point on the planet, on land at least.
The Dead Sea.
Dead Sea.
That's quite a
hold on, I'm
stream
sorry.
of consciousness, John.
Thank you. Well, there's a lot of like connections that were made. We actually
there were some steps in between, but yeah, you got there.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
at some point in time, like I think during the training and everything, I brought up the Dead Sea, and it's like, yeah, you would just float because of how salty it is. But it just got me thinking about the Dead Sea. So I wanted to learn a little bit more. So my topic today is the Dead Sea.
Oh, cool.
Very, very cool.
So for the most part, there's not much or any life in the Dead Sea. And part of that is just because of how much salt there is. It is nearly 10 times saltier than seawater.
Wow.
So, to give you a little context, it's about 340 grams of salt in every liter of water.
Don't get that in your eyes.
All right.
No.
Yeah.
That is one thing that they tell you cannot ever. If you swim in the Dead Sea, you do not ever want to open your eyes underneath the water because it'll just make your eyes burn.
How does it
Really?
do with other mucous membranes is what I've always wondered.
It's a good question. I don't know.
I mean, our bodies are salty. I'd rather get salt water up my nose, for example, than get fresh water up my nose, which is very painful to get fresh water up your nose. But salt water feels fine.
I'm still dealing with the fact that I got a lot of fresh water up my nose. But because of how salty that water is, it actually causes the water to it causes the water to be denser a lot than
Right.
the human bodies. So it allows us to be able to easily float on the top, on the surface.
Yeah, I've seen some like pictures and video and stuff, and it looks like really weird to swim in.
Yeah, it does. To give you a little context, at the surface of the Dead Sea, I said it was the lowest point on Earth. It's about 1,400 feet below sea level. It's located between Israel and Jordan, so it is really low. And then at its deepest point, which is nearly 1,000 feet deep, so that means the lowest point there is 2,400 feet below sea level.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah. Now here's the thing is unfortunately, in recent decades, due to mining and other water issues in that particular area, the Dead Sea has actually become both lower and saltier in recent decades. But one thing I wanted to talk about was more about the history of the Dead Sea, just in general, because it's kind of bizarre. Because why does it have that amount of salt in it? You know, like that doesn't make much sense. So a long time ago, it actually about 18,000 years ago, it was actually originally part of a much larger lake that extended to the Sea of Galilee. So what ended up happening is thousands and thousands of years ago, it was part of this much larger lake or sea that eventually split due to the shift of some tectonic plates.
Okay.
It was
that's like one of Victoria's favorite topics.
It
Yes.
is. It was still the lowest point on Earth, but it was connected not only to several of the rivers, but it was also connected to the Red Sea. There was another shift, and it cut off the connection to the Red Sea. So the Dead Sea now receives water from a couple different rivers in the area, like the Jordan River, but it no longer has any outflow.
Yeah.
Now, this particular space is known as like the Syrian-African Rift Valley. So it's in the Middle East between Israel and Jordan, like I said earlier. But because of the climate of that particular space, it gets all of this input from the rivers. It has nowhere else to go, but it regularly gets very, very hot in that space. So it causes the water to evaporate and leave behind the minerals and the salt. So it just builds up and builds up and builds up in the remaining water as it gets refreshed from the rivers.
It's the salt that's always been there. It's just there's less water, so the concentration of salt is higher.
Yeah, because
at
one
new
point
salt
in time,
coming in.
There's not any new salt coming in because at one point in time it was connected with the Red Sea, which is a salt water.
So that's where the salt came from initially, like the salt water.
Right.
Initially,
so
yeah.
The river inflow is just not enough to dilute the salt that was already there.
No, not at all.
It evaporates more than it. Yeah. That makes sense.
And not only that, but there are actually some fairly rich salt deposits in that area, which are...
That's what I was wondering.
Yes, there are rich salt deposits in that area and in that space as well, which contribute to the salinity of of the Dead Sea.
So somewhere way back in time, there was some other sea that completely dried up, that then left behind huge salt deposits, which are now leaching in even more into this smaller body.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was according to one of my sources, which was deadsea.com. There's a bunch of different theories too, but there's one thought that the area was actually repeatedly flooded by water from the Mediterranean Sea, creating some sort of lake that connected to the Red Sea eventually, and there was just a lot of little creations that were created. There's a lot of theories about how exactly it came to be, but it's still pretty nuts. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about the Dead Sea, and because it's just kind of crazy how it's so I mean, of course it's just evaporation, but still.
It is an extreme, so it's always interesting to hear about extremes.
Yeah. And
extreme lake.
Extreme lake.
Or sea. We'll call it a sea. It's a big lake. Sea.
Yeah. It's a pretty big, well, that's because we live near a very large lake that could be considered a sea, but it's freshwater.
Oh, you mean Sea Superior?
Yeah, that
Superior
one.
Sea.
Superior Sea. It is the superior of the seas. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, it'll be Victoria.
Well, this was one of those weeks where I came across a news item and I was like, that's it. That's my topic for this week.
We got messages from you saying,
have you looked at the news recently?
Yeah,
it was very,
I just want to make sure.
You didn't want to go into what it was, but...
Yeah, and to be honest, like, I had seen news recently, but so that caused me to not look at the news anymore.
Okay, you'll be surprised then. Well, this story starts back in 2009 in the Caribbean, or the Caribbean, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And
Oceanic water episode here.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to stay in the ocean exactly. So Dr. Olivier Gros was working in the mangrove forests of Guadeloupe, and he noticed a dead leaf in the water that was covered with very thin white filaments. So Olivier brought this back to the lab, and he thought at first they were probably fungi or maybe some kind of sponge or other small animal.
Right.
However, once they got the strands back to the lab, they did some analysis, including some DNA analysis, and eventually discovered that these were bacteria.
Okay.
Yep. I saw the headline. I didn't read the article.
Yeah. So
I have no idea what you're talking about.
They thought, okay, so these are probably like really long chains of bacteria, kind of a colony, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not so fast.
Nope. What?
They looked at the strands under an electron microscope, and they were shocked to find that each strand was a single giant bacterial cell.
What?
Yeah.
Yes.
What?
Huge.
That's huge. You can't normally see bacteria with the naked eye.
That's right, Rachel. You cannot.
What?
Well observed. Well spotted. Yes.
The largest one that they observed was 20,000 microns long. That's 2 centimeters, folks, or about 3/4 of an inch.
Wow.
That's like the diameter of a penny.
Oh.
The average.
Small,
That's
huge.
That's big on bacteria scale.
I'm literally holding a penny right now for reference.
Yeah.
And it does not feel like a bacteria should be this big. That seems super wrong. Ooh, it's a wheat penny. Go me.
Oh,
I found a wheat
wow.
penny. That's probably why it was sitting here.
Anymore. So the average length, 22 centimeters was like the biggest one, and the average length was 9,000 microns, which is 0.9 of a centimeter, which is still very large.
That's like a giant to us.
Yeah, to say this is mind-blowingly large for a bacterium is really understating it. One of the most common bacteria in the human body is pretty average size for a bacteria. It's Escherichia coli, E. coli. It's a gut microbe, and it has an average length of 2 microns. So
No,
to put this in perspective,
that's smaller.
That is smaller. To put this in perspective,
Just a bit.
The average U.S. woman is 1.62 meters tall, about 5 feet 4 inches.
Yeah, it's a
I love
Rachel.
where we're going with this. Yep.
It's Rachel. If a person were as much bigger compared to an average woman as this new bacteria is compared to E. coli, this extremely tall person would be 16.2 kilometers tall.
Kilometers tall?
Oh
Yes.
my god.
That is.
Oh my
That
god.
is
10
so tall.
miles tall. Oh, that's
I was gonna say. I
so
would
basically Paul
no,
Bunyan.
I don't want to
That's
be
amazing.
that tall. Oh, I
Even
don't want to
bigger
be
than
that
Paul
tall.
Bunyan.
Oh.
Oh. Can we
That
call
is a
this,
lot of Rachels.
I hope. Oh my gosh. There's a common
Oh.
name in there somewhere that has something to do with giants or Paul Bunyan or something.
Yeah,
Right?
I like it. Well, I was going to say it's awkward to keep calling it this new bacteria, so I'm going to give you its scientific name, even though it doesn't have a common name yet. It's called
Okay.
Biomargarita magnifica, which is a pretty good one.
That is pretty good.
Was it, wow. So the magnificent margarita.
Yeah,
That is
so
also what
thio
I
is
heard.
actually
Yeah.
sulfur. It's a sulfur-eating bacteria.
Okay.
I don't like the idea of a sulfurious margarita. That doesn't sound quite as
No,
Sounds
refreshing.
eggy.
it does sound eggy.
Oh, ew. Oh, God. Don't
Kirk
put
is
eggs
out.
in your margarita, people. Or on your margarita pizza.
Actually, I mean, if it were like
one.
there's cocktails that have
Like
egg white
egg
in
white,
them.
yeah, like
the
frothy,
pisco sour.
Yeah, still,
Whiskey sours are
still.
they're pretty good.
Yeah, but if you got sulfur, your egg has gone bad. Don't do that.
Yes,
That's true.
I feel like we've strayed a bit from your topic.
Just a bit.
Bring us back
So-
there, Victoria.
I want to talk a little bit about why it is so strange to find such a large bacterium. So we're going to do a little biology review. So
Okay.
first of all, animals, plants, fungi, and the huge array of single-celled organisms that we call protista are all eukaryotes, which means that their cells have their
Love it,
DNA
yep.
that's contained within a nucleus. They have different membrane-bound organelles within the cell that do a lot of different functions in the cell. And also the cells have various types of internal structural supports, and they kind of act almost like guy wires to keep the cell from tearing apart, even if it's fairly large.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
And the nucleus and the organelles also help the cell function efficiently at a fairly large size, because it means there's specific sites for specific functions like DNA replication. And they
Right.
have mitochondria to produce the energy for the cell. And if it's a bigger cell, it just can have more mitochondria, right?
Right.
The
So
powerhouse of the cell. Correct.
exactly, the powerhouse of the cell. Thank you. Most eukaryotic cells are still what you would consider quite small, but they're a lot larger than bacteria. So, average bacteria size, as I mentioned, is about 2 microns. The average eukaryotic cell size is 10 to 20 microns. And some can be much larger. So, for example, the muscle cells in the human body can be 2 to 3 centimeters long. And an ostrich egg cell before fertilization is about 1.5 centimeters long.
Okay.
And there's also a species of algae that it turns out is single-celled, but each cell is like 15 to 30 centimeters long. So like
Oh, man.
6 to 12 inches. But it's kind
Wow.
of branched like a frond, so it's a leaf shape almost in itself. Pretty cool.
Cool.
Topic for another episode.
Ugh,
Right.
algae is so cool.
Yeah. Bacteria and archaea, on the other hand, are prokaryotes. Normally, their DNA just exists as a free-floating loop inside the cell, and all of their cell processes are basically dependent on diffusion, and metabolic reactions take place, like the energy that runs the cell takes place within the cell's outer membrane. So if you're only 2 microns in size, that's fine because everything is pretty close to where you are. But as the cell gets larger, the surface area to volume ratio decreases, and it starts not being able to make enough energy for its size because it's limited by the amount of space on the membrane to make energy.
Right.
Sure.
And replicating DNA also becomes a problem because you have to first find the DNA in this huge space.
Yeah.
And so it's not right there anymore. So, for a long time, biologists thought that these factors were an absolute limit on the size of bacterial cells.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
But there were some discoveries in the 1990s that started challenging this view. They started discovering some larger bacteria that have actual different compartments, kind of similar to organelles in function, which can help overcome those issues of DNA replication and energy metabolism.
Sure.
So for example, they found a bacteria that's it's a symbiotic bacteria in surgeonfish that is about 600 microns. That's 0.6 millimeters, or about the size of a grain of salt. Thiomargarita magnifica still blows all of them out of the water, so to speak.
100%. Yeah.
We may need that salt for the margarita, though, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
Anytime.
Indeed. So how does it get around all these problems of being so large? Well, they're still learning about it.
It's like a big city where the recycling plant is far away and the garbage is far away and you can't get anywhere. It's not a livable city.
It's a problem, and one of the ways it solves it is that it has a very large vacuole in the center. So this is basically a fluid-filled sac that doesn't do anything, but it pushes the cytoplasm, which is like where the business of the cell takes place, to the outer margin. So
all right.
it reduces the amount of space that stuff needs to diffuse across to get cell things done. But that's not all. It straight up has membrane-bound organelles.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, you're that large. You, one, kind of have to, but two, you just absorb whatever is near you because you're that big.
I mean, they're different than the ones in eukaryotic
sort of
cells.
break our definition of what a bacteria is at all? Like, is
it
this like
kind
a
of
new
does.
type of bacteria? Yeah.
It starts to blur the boundaries between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And for one thing, it has multiple little DNA containers, which the researchers who discovered this are calling pepins, like little seeds. So it's basically like a mini nucleus, and it includes ribosomes, which translate DNA into proteins, all in that one site. So it has multiple sites where it can replicate the DNA, which is pretty amazing. And and the various membranes of the cell surfaces have all kinds of compartments and I guess folds. And so there's a lot more space for energy production too.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, obviously, like there's a lot of questions about this species that we don't know yet, and a lot to still be found out. So one of the questions we don't know about is you can like pluck this off the leaf and move it, and so it's very sturdy and robust. So what kind of internal support structure does the cell have to help it hang together like that? And importantly, like, why is it so large evolutionarily? What?
How did it get to be that large? Especially since nothing else is even close.
Yeah, that we know of yet.
That we know of.
Right.
I mean, the bacterial world is really almost unexplored when you think about what's out there.
Oh, 100%.
Right?
That's what you got to go into, kids. Get on it.
Into microbiology, bacteriology. That's where the money is. So it's just really fascinating scientific discovery that I needed to talk about, and I hope to learn more about it in the future.
Yeah, same.
So
Yeah,
for
that was
this,
wild.
for this research, I relied largely on a New York Times article by Carl Zimmer and a news article in the journal Nature that was by Catherine Sanderson. So thank you to those sources.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah, I'd seen the headlines, but I did not realize how strange it truly was.
Yeah.
Brand new information to me.
I was the last one this week, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap this up.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.
See you then.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all of our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star review, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach out to us on social media by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can also check out our website, which is strangebynaturepodcast.com. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.
Maybe it's Madagascar. I don't know. You can't prove it.
You'll have to find out.